there is an ordering principle in chaos. I mean, this is one thing that going back to rationalism, right? The thing that is, and that I ran into head first, like a brick wall, is that rationality always is built on some set of unquestioned, not unquestionable, but unquestioned axioms. Like if you're in a logical system, you're basing some portion of your thought process on things that you assume to be true. These are axioms. In medicine, for example, the axiomatic assumption of modern mainstream high-tech Western medicine is reductionism. I mean, there's a belief that truer reality exists at the microscopic, cellular, molecular level. And it's very powerful, but those are not the only axioms that you can have. You can chain, if you will, like rationalism is like, okay, so you add knowledge, and if you add enough knowledge, then it's like what we don't like the axioms about your rational system don't matter because we'll just have enough knowledge in the numerator. But my discovery, and this is deep understanding of the Asian epistemology. I had this talk earlier with another Maverick, Nick
Which is,
Hudson, who you would just love.
oh, I
But the,
would, I
yeah,
would. And I read some of Nick too in his comments, and he's cogent in my opinion. But
outstanding thinker.
the Asian system has within it certainly flaws, like any system. Who could deny that? But it is a legitimate and valid historical methodology, or contains with it methodologies of healing that are very powerful. Who can deny? Why would that be denied to some huge human civilization?
But this was my crusade, and
Yes.
I'll put a fine point on exactly what it is that is so notable and so worthwhile to understand about their approach. So if you change the denominator from reductionism to, right, their system is a holistic system. If you
Yeah.
have a problem over here, it's going to have an effect over here. And that is a knowable consequence of what is happening in your liver, right, vis-a-vis your spleen, for example. And
Is it, as a
their
layman,
entire,
can I ask this question?
yes, sir.
Is it built around connectivity and energy?
It's
That
built it's built on pattern discrimination. Their diagnostic methodology is not based on a reductionist like, oh, we've pinpointed the problem or the cell or whatever. Like so much of the mainstream
Esther,
medical thought process
yes,
is a reductionist thought process.
I completely
It
agree with you.
to quote Ian McGilchrist, right? It is a left hemispheric dominated kind of, if you're familiar with this man's work, right? His whole discussion of the hemispheric, we live in two realities, right? You can
Yes.
always look at something as separate from the whole. That is the Western way. And the Eastern way, the Asian way, they codified a system of diagnosis based on pattern discrimination. Why does that matter? Because it's really helpful when you have to treat people with chronic illness. And so
Yes.
chronic disease is always multifactorial if you have a diagnostic methodology that takes into account, but not in a new age, right? This is the big disease, right? In the West is like you learn a little bit, you go down the sort of eclectic path of understanding something about Asian philosophy and thought and medicine and healing.
Yes.
And then you go, I got it. Your mind creates reality. And it's like, no, that's not what they're saying, right? That's not I mean, it's in there, right? That they sort of
Yes.
reify a mental projection is reality because you're cognizing this inside, like it's unique to you. Well, this is what we develop. This is how you get to nihilism in the West. This poor understanding of Asian thinking, which is like,
Yes.
well, it's all made up. It's my reality. I can make it whatever I want, and it's like, and that's how you get to, oh, I'm a woman in a man's body, and all the rest of this. It's like, no,
Yeah. That's
that's
like
not that's
hyper
not correct.
reductionism.
Yeah, you came to the, yeah, it's exactly. You came to the wrong conclusion because you didn't dig deep enough. The important thing about this other denominator, this holistic pattern discrimination denominator, is that you can make sense out of incredibly complex problems in the medical world using a
Yes.
different methodology, and they absolutely do not know and do not want to know the first thing about it. It's a bizarre thing. I mean, here I'm talking now, referring back to the institutional sort of door that gets slammed in
That's
your
that's
face. It's like,
that's follow the money, isn't it? Partly.
yeah, in the end, of course. I mean, doctors leave medical
Yeah.
school with an average of $300,000 in student debt. They're going to do
Well,
whatever they're
it's
damn well told to do.
oh yeah, the doctors are as a class, God bless them, are the good boys and good girls their whole life. They're the
That's it.
ones that
That's it.
jump, they jump through the hoops. They are the exact opposite of the vanguard scientist, the investigator, the explorer. 98% of MDs are they walk through each authority-driven step.
Yep.
And they are the last people, no matter what their IQ is, which can obviously be very high, who are designed or conditioned to challenge authority. They're the last
That
people on the planet.
that got beaten out of them long before they finished med school. You can be sure. Yeah.
That got
Yeah.
beat out of them probably before they even were
Yeah.
granted entrance into med school, but
Organic
certainly,
chemistry. Yeah, exactly.
yeah, it's all about, jumping through the hoops that the prescribed consensus authority says I must do. And listen, the women are as bad as the men on that in that profession, maybe worse.
I would
And
say
so,
more, yeah, I would say the zeitgeist is that because women are doing so well in
yes,
institutional kind of settings, that because they're also very agreeable and they're very eager to please by doing what they're told, right, to get to positions of authority within
right.
institutional
Well, you'd
settings.
think that they would embrace this other hemispheric idea because it would be perceived to be a little bit more feminine or part of the feminine esoteric in Asian medicine. And I'm not saying that's accurate, but that's not the case at all. When they're sunk deep into Western medicine, they are the most intractable. But we have a problem in Western medicine. I saw that through my work as a filmmaker. And I
Yep.
saw it in my work also in wildlife management, trying to preserve and conserve wildlife. And there was a whole enormously well-funded phalanx that had no place for wildlife management that included any kind of recreational hunting or food procurement, which was even more important. No, that could not be allowed to manage wildlife. And I was like, well, uh, we're not supposed to do that. Well, I say, well, it's obviously we're supposed to manage wildlife. Who's going to manage them if we don't? Like, is there another creature you can point to that's going to be doing this management worldwide besides us?
Yep.
It seems like we've been given a role to manage. Let's do it right. Well, I kept running up like you did against these crazy and irrational kind of positions on the part of individuals and institutions. And I realized that their arguments over time, I realized, starting from a position that was pretty insecure, Tane, that the consensus science was hard to challenge and they had a lot of ammunition on their side. They had a lot of facts on their side. I came to the conclusion over a long time slugging it out in some of these areas that they didn't, that it was all a facade, that the facts were not on their side frequently, and that they were presenting inalterable statements of, infinite and eternal truth with the slenderest of contrivances of evidence. Goodness gracious. What
Sounds
could
about
be more
accurate.
beneficial for humanity that we co-join writ large the methodology of Eastern or Asian medicine with the Western reductionists? We're not saying there's not a place for reductionism. We're only saying it's not adequate.
Well, one of the
Right?
features of the left hemispheric reductionist mind is to believe that only one system exists. I mean, this is the essence of McGilchrist's work comes down to that important point is that there is no place in like he does the book is titled The Master and His Emissary, and the emissary is of course the left hemisphere and the master is the nonverbal right hemispheric pattern recognition brain that sort of understands the big picture even if it can't quite articulate exactly what it sees. It's the side of you that understands poetry and like things of this nature, right? That has a grasp, that's something that understands God, right? That has an understanding that there is something bigger going on. And even though the emissary over here can't quite work it out, right? But that the emissary doesn't know that it's the emissary, right? That's one of the features of the clerk that is sort of running all of our institutions now. Medicine is the obvious one, but it's the one I'm most familiar with. But you see it all throughout all of the state institutions, all politics. It's all run by the exact same mentality, which is partly why we're in the very curious situation that we're in, and what a time to be alive while they try to work it out without driving it off the cliff.
What will happen?
We
That's,
will see. We will
we'll
see. I want to
see.
go back to something you said. What got you out of the family business? Did you come to a certain, I know we're building to your epiphany here,
Yeah.
and the kind of
Yeah.
events that really changed your idea about how the world works, but what got you out of the family business and what drove you into the ministry? I'm fascinated.
Well, those are two somewhat related reasons, but they are separate probably. So, on one hand, I talked a little bit about my grandparents, and understand that my father was a World War II veteran. So I'm in that kind of generational. My father was actually a World War II veteran, not his father. His father was a World War I veteran. So my father was rather old school. He was an industrialist, and his father had been a railroad executive. So these were, you know, a sort of a old-fashioned kind of businesses, if you will, highly profitable, but old-fashioned. And my father was a very gifted businessman. God bless him. He's dead now. He lived well into his 90s. Um, but he had a particular way of doing business. And I believe that for our company to expand and grow into the uncharted waters of the future, that we were going to have to change. Um, Not that we needed to at that time, because things were fine. They were running swimmingly. But I knew that there was a limited time frame on that, and I was quite concerned about my father's ability to go along with those necessary changes. And I realized then, and I knew that he might live a long time too. So, he was still involved with business almost up until his dying day, certainly his dying years. And so I just came to the conclusion that I was not going to be able to affect the changes I would have liked to have made with him, and that his way of doing business, which was very suitable for his personality, was not as suitable for mine. So that's the negative side. On the positive side, I had an unusual experience, and I'll try to describe this briefly. But I was a Christian. I was a member supporter of kind of the flagship Episcopal Anglican church in our city that I was living in with my wife. We weren't living in Houston at that time, and I'd moved away from Los Angeles, so we were living in Fort Worth, and we had met and there we'd married, and I was very happy with my wife. But I was reading a classic work by a man named Augustine of Hippo, sometimes called Saint Augustine. He's a famous Catholic saint, and he was a bishop living in the fourth century. And he wrote a famous treatise called The City of God. And in that, Augustine, he contrasts the city of man and the city of God. And the city of God's eternal, it's spiritual, it's not entirely visible right now, not visible in some cases at all. And the city of man is quite visible. You can visit the cities of man. You can visit the different representations. They're temporal. They change. They're not infinite, not eternal. And they're whatever else they're typified that's good or great, they're typified also by human tragedy, by sickness, death, loss, war, violence, famine, crime, insanity, um, disruptions of all kinds, natural disruption. So he contrasts this with this. And I had been a very, very active person trying to reform things in the world in a good way. I was trying to help the poor, trying to help orphans. I was trying to, alleviate the suffering of the needy. I was trying to
Wildlife. Yeah.
wildlife. I was trying to manage wildlife. I was, as much as during that time as a single bachelor with a pretty big bank account at my disposal. I was trying to encourage people to live a good life, and I had a great life. I mean, I wasn't a person who was down and out. I was a person who was up and in. Driving my 164L Alfa Romeo, living in this huge house on this enormous ranch with this 50,000-gallon swimming pool. Me and my wife in this enormous 5,000 square foot house. And I had beautiful horses and dogs and trips, and my honeymoon was like a month long. So life was good.
Mine too.
Yeah, life was good. And I was, I didn't marry till I was 35. So I was the old marrying type. And I didn't have children until well into my 40s. So um, I read this book though, and I realized the incremental mores that I was going to get, more this, more this, more money, more whatever. I kind of reached that theory of marginal utility that they teach you in business school.
Yep.
Like to the customer, like just, more ice cream is it's a utility, but it's a marginal utility once they have enough ice cream,
Yep.
so to speak, or whatever. They have a nice car. Another nice car is good, but it provides less marginal utility than the first one. Like the first one was, X%, and this one is like, well, maybe half of that, or then the third one is like go way down. I knew I was at that point where like marginal utility, I was living the principle. I had everything. I had a beautiful wife. I had a beautiful home. I had, everything a man at that age could want. But I knew something was lacking big time. And when I read St. Augustine's book, I realized that I was made for eternity and that I wanted to live forever. And I just didn't want to go back, as a droplet into the ocean, even though I know some people believe that because of their adherence to Buddhism or Hinduism. But I kind of wanted to keep my personality, but have it improved and like living forever, but in a better place in this world, which I was realizing after my experience with my friend who went to prison that the reform was only going to be partial here. There was no full reform possible at all. I came to a hard stop on that. And working with these poor, disadvantaged orphans and youth, I realized I was doing the best I could along with our other people to help them. And only a certain percentage of them, Tane, were going to have what you'd call a normal life.
That's right.
And I knew if there was going to be ultimate justice for some of these people, or justice for my friend who went to prison unjustly, or for other situations for people who are experienced dreadfully difficult situations, and I was not one of them. I was remarkably privileged, but I knew that there were dreadfully, underprivileged, and I couldn't just ignore it
Yeah.
and say, well, that doesn't exist because I'm having a great time. And I realized that I needed another world than the one I was living in. If I didn't need one, I wanted one. And St. Augustine and the Bible were the answer for me. I said, oh, of course. Jesus is always talking about his eternal kingdom, his Father's kingdom, and I'm going away to build a place for you there, and I'm going to bring you back to be with me. And then also this body, which is obviously getting old and will ultimately die, it's not the permanent body, it's a temporary body. It needs to be taken care of the best as possible. It needs to be, honored and respected and
Right.
improved, but it still doesn't last more than 100 years or thereabouts. And
Mm.
most people are lucky to last 80.
Three score and 10. Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
and then you need a new car.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
to ride it, And so I'm like, okay, I want that car. I want my new body. And I didn't like the transhumanist ideas because I thought, well, they're temporary anyway, and they're really weird. And I'm still living in this unfortunate world where you have a lot of tragedy with people who are starving to death and are uneducated and who are sick and old or, violently treated. So that became really clear to me. And I was so captured by this idea about the eternal nature that whatever else Christianity was about. And Christianity was about many things and had a long and, flawed history, as all human institutions, but had produced a lot of wondrous things too, I felt. And I was so captured by this eternal perspective, the eternal perspective, which was not part of my upbringing, was not part of my personal ethos. And this happened in my 30s, right when I married. I just wanted to talk to people about it. I just
Wow.
wanted to have a chance to talk to people about this eternal nature that was our destiny, potentially. And I thought that is a summa bonum, the highest good that can come out of this deal. And what I found was once I embraced that principle, here is the weird thing that happened, Tane. Weirdest of all. So I was like, okay, I'm going to let the big house go. I'm going to sell my sports car. I'm going to sell my stock back for a pittance to the company, and I'm going to go become a priest. And I did.
Wow.
I did. I moved to an island with my wife, and we lived on the island, and I wrote a thesis for kind of a famous Anglican Oxford Don. And he liked what I wrote, and they ordained me as a priest. And then I could talk to people about God and eternity as much as I wanted to. It was my job.
That's tremendous. You know,
But the
that is,
weird,
we
yeah, I
haven't
know
even we
it's
haven't even
such
gotten to
change.
the really yeah, to the really outrageous parts of your life story. That's still coming, folks.
Yeah, that's
So
still coming. So what was weird is I gave everything up, and I thought, well, my life's changed permanently here, and God bless my wife too. I mean, she kind of married a young Turk, kind of, sort of at the top of my game with a bright future there. I was going to take over the company, and and then she ends up marrying this parish priest. But
yeah, preacher.
the weird thing was, Tane, I won't go into all the details, but I've had more adventures since making that decision, and even more what you would typically call worldly experiences than I did before the decision. That's really what's marked. There's
And
some
that
dramatic
and
ones.
that is the principle. That is the main principle of all mythology, certainly Western mythology, not Eastern, but this idea that if you feel the call,
Yeah,
it's talked about as the call,
it was a call.
probably made famous by the work of Joseph Campbell. But everywhere you look, right, the myth is the protagonist is doing whatever mundane thing he or she is doing, usually he, and then there's a call to adventure,
Yes,
and it's deeply personal. it's
right.
not it's not the same for, right, you pick two people, it's going to be radically different, right? At least
Yes,
outwardly it is different, but
that's right.
you develop in such a way that if you answer the call, the flip side here I'll talk about in a second, but if you answer the call to adventure, all kinds of things happen, helpers appear, and really magical kind of what we call coincidences, synchronicity, is activated and present in your life like over and over again to let you know, like, yeah, you're still on the path, keep going. And if you don't answer the call, right, had you not done what you did, you get to live in hell. That's what happens, right? If
Mhm.
you feel, and here I'm not talking about like had you not become ordained and gone into the
Right,
ministry, had you not
right.
answered the call to adventure, which in your case was about talking to people about, um, and it's a tremendous thing that the role that religion and the church has played. Because I was never confirmed in the church. We went to church until I was like 12, and I was like, Mom, please, you know. But in really tough times in my life, spontaneously, I would walk into a church and everything would
Yes,
change. And I just came from Guatemala, the poor little pueblo where I live, San Marcos La Laguna. Um, Huge, huge impact on my life. But every time I go back, the thing that I'm left with, more than my house, more than my property, which is a beautiful spread I have on Lake Atitlan, is I go to church. I go to church in the pueblo. I don't always go to church. I always make a point to do something on Sunday to, right, to sort of review my week and my life and like do something that smacks of religion, my own way. But I go to church in this pueblo. And the reason I go to church in this pueblo, by God, is if ever you doubted, the power and the legitimacy of the Christian faith, go to a place where people really have it tough and see
yeah,
what it does for them.
right.
Because when you talk about injustice, when you talk about hardship, when you talk about like the hard knocks of life, you got to look really hard to find any group of people more put upon than the indigenous of the world. And the indigenous Maya people in this pueblo, it's so uplifting, I can't describe it. Like, it puts a lump in my throat, because to see the impact that just going to church and just like, let's be a little bit
Yes,
better to each other, and just the most minuscule effort to
yes,
acknowledge that, like, hey, there is this mysterious thing that also exists in our life and in the world, and we should
yes.
probably pay it some kind of respect because it does have
Absolutely.
the last vote. It's tremendous. It's a
Well, and
tremendous feeling.
the power too of having mistakes and wrongdoings, whether real or imagined, absolved. That is a huge psychological, and I believe it's an ontological reality too, not just contrived. But even if a person looked at it only from the psychological standpoint, and that there was no real ontology behind it, but the fact that the experiencer feels forgiven, absolved, a fresh start every week, every month, however often,
Yeah,
that's
and you,
that's that's enormous on
it,
people's
it's
lives.
enormous. And also
Enormous.
back to your lawsuit, right? And to also just say like, I don't actually know everything, and it's
Yes, that's
okay.
right.
Yeah, like,
That's
hey,
right.
I'm not certain about what I'm doing here. I don't totally know. Maybe you could give me some guidance that would help me in the next
Oh,
week.
yes.
Something that small and the impact that it makes, and to
Yes.
watch people, to watch, I mean, the church is packed. And
It's packed.
I
Yes.
can't understand, and not because my Spanish isn't good enough, but because there's always an echo and reverberation, because it's a big church with a great big high ceiling and it echoes around in there. So I can't
Yeah.
follow everything that's being said, mostly because I just want to be there, right? I just want to actually experience that. And I look at the people around, and when everybody offers each other a sign of peace, like the whole thing is so wholesome that again, I'm reminded again of my atheist friends who are so certain of everything, and it brings a smile to my face, I tell you, and a real
That's
peace, like a real
yes. Well, it's
tranquility.
wonderful to experience that in an indigenous community where I'm not going to say that people are simple, but at least their faith might be simpler in some ways or less
Very much,
complicated.
very much.
Yeah. And I think the other thing about the experience that people have in those settings is not even that they experience personal absolution, which of course is granted in a very formal way, particularly in a Catholic church, but also in an Anglican and others. But I think even as important as that is that it's a place where people can be helped along to forgive other people.
Yes,
And that's a real need
it's
for
the
everyone.
alchemy of healing.
The alchemy of healing. And the forgiving
Forgive
of others is actually for your own benefit first,
first.
not for the other person,
It would be
whoever that may
better if
be.
it were taught that way. Like, listen, stop
Yeah.
holding on to this. You're killing
Stop harming
yourself.
yourself.
Yeah,
Right.
you're killing yourself. Like, who are you harming by this resentment or whatever else? I mean, that
Yeah.
was a big theme in my life, probably in everybody's lives. You're gonna come across something. It's like, I just can't forgive. It's like, well, you better, like you better
Yes.
find it within you to forgive. And
Yes.
so
There
tremendous.
is a little bit of a difference, I think, with personal forgiveness, which would dovetail into how do we look at institutions, though, that have committed wrongdoing and perpetrated crimes. I mean, it's one thing to talk about an individual that's perpetrated a wrongdoing that's harmed you or others that you observe or experience. It's another thing to come to terms with that institution that the person's a part of, or an institution that is just has nameless, faceless people that you can't even identify as a recipient of your grace. And I think that's a real issue for us to work through today to try to understand, the wrongdoings that are perpetrated by the institutions of government and other institutions, the scientific institutions, the for-profit corporations as institutions, the agencies and bureaucracies that make up the governmental matrix, and obviously, sort of separately but connected, are religious institutions. How do you forgive them, and at what level are we supposed to? Arising out of, if you have the experience I had, where you have more and more revelation, more and more information, more and more evidence of wrongdoing by institutional wrongdoing. Um, and the journey that I was on brought both my wife and myself to simultaneously, fortunately, simultaneously, where out of a challenge from a very well connected political person who was the son of a prominent, very prominent politician who was a friend of ours, a good friend. He was the son of a prominent politician. And he challenged us to look into controversial narrative, the evidence around 9/11, which weirdly enough, I had never done. I mean, I had maybe some questions about it, but I had never really looked at it. And I had not looked at it to the point which seems now to be ridiculous, but at the time, I did not actually know how many buildings had collapsed on 9/11. I didn't know.
You're not the only one.
No, I wasn't the only one, and I discovered this, Tane. So I took up the challenge from my friend who told me, he said, once you start to look, he said, you won't be able to stop looking.
Yep.
And so by that time, I'd already had major institutional challenge in my life where I was very, um, I was, very awake and aware of the capacity for institutional wrongdoing because I had observed it and seen it. But 9/11 was a whole new dilemma because 9/11 was so extraordinarily large. It was so big. How I could see how you could approach some of it with institutional wrongdoing, but from inception to execution to aftermath, I thought that's a stretch. That's certainly a stretch. That is a big project, man, where they're like the whole thing is institutionally corrupt. But I couldn't deny this fact. I learned early on in my investigation that, oh no, there were three buildings and the third one was not hit by an airplane, of course. A big
Nope.
building, a very big building, 50 plus stories. That's a big
50
building.
stories of cement and steel.
Right.
And
And
it
because
fell
of
down because of an office fire.
bingo. So, it's one of those things where in approaching very complex issues, and I've been through this before in many of my most complex endeavors, and some of the trials I've been through, which I won't tell you about the trials I was through. I'm not very litigious, but there certainly have been some people litigious against me. But I've always won through the help of the divine, I guess. But thank you. But you can reduce very complex things down to um, very simple issues if you follow a protocol. I'd learned this. And one of the protocols was that even though there was an enormous amount of information that was not fully explainable about 9/11, either because there was not evidence that was accessible or because the possibilities were more than two or three. But with Building 7, which collapsed, there were only so many possibilities. That was an event where clearly the possibilities were extraordinarily restricted, and the possibilities that existed were not ones that were being proffered as the official story at all.
Yeah,
There's no way.
we know what didn't happen.
What didn't happen. And you might say, well, then, why did you get so caught up in investigating 9/11 for a while, Logan? Well, I did because it was so important.
Yeah,
And the reason
exactly.
it was so important was this. If 9/11 was a black operation and a false flag, if you will, carried out by one or several government agencies or quasi-government agencies or contractors to them and or foreign governments, then it was the biggest story, not only of the 21st century, but it was probably the biggest story in 100 years.
I
It
agree.
was it was so important to understand this. If you didn't get that right, you missed so much else.
Yep.
You agree? So
I
you
agree completely. My
yeah,
father was at the Pentagon that wasn't hit by a plane. I mean, that clearly was not hit by a plane.
hit by a
And
missile or a drone or something.
clearly. And
Clearly.
I talked to him about this at one point,
Yeah.
and I came to the very certain conclusion that somebody who got up, my father used to wake up at between 2 and 3 a.m. to get a workout and beat the traffic to get into DC. And he did this for 40 years. Well, not
Yes.
to DC. We weren't stationed there the whole time, but he was there that day. And you cannot confront somebody with the idea. He used to brief Dick Cheney. You cannot confront somebody who sacrificed that much of his time on earth to an organization that he believed, with his red-blooded patriotic heart, was a force for good in the world, with the fact
Absolutely.
that the people involved were part of the US government.
Well,
That
and I think
somebody inside knew, that somebody was up to something. Again, like I don't
yeah,
pretend to know
yeah,
exactly what happened that
yeah.
day, but we
Yes.
definitely know what didn't happen.
We
And
know what
what
didn't
didn't
happen.
happen was the story
Yeah,
you were told, and that's
that's
enough.
right.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that it's clear, and upon further investigation, the conclusions I came to, which you could believe that things were known, pre-existing knowledge, that wasn't hard to believe necessarily. That was unfortunate, but it wasn't impossible to believe that, because even if you didn't have the evidence for that, logic could lead you to the conclusion that some people who could have possibly done something to prevent it knew something. That is not an irrational thought. How they would know would vary, how they had the knowledge, but the fact that they could know or would know wasn't crazy. What was much further uh, was that individuals in very important government agencies or departments, like the Pentagon or like the intelligence agencies, and to the level of parts of those bureaucracies and agencies, knew about 9/11, and not only knew about it, but executed it and planned it. So it came clear to me that it was undeniable that 9/11, after reviewing all of the information over a period of months, because I had the ability to do that because I was in between managing a family property, this ranch down in Texas, for my mother's estate, who'd passed away, my mother, on my behalf and my behalf of my sisters. I was in between positions and I was on a sabbatical that was uh, a paid sabbatical. And I had time to research, and I had been trained academically to research. If you research one topic, you can research another.
Yep.
I've been trained at an academic level. I could research. Nobody could tell me I couldn't do my own research. My wife had a master's degree. She could do research. So we
Yep.
were capable. So we did the research. And although to this day we walk away without entirely definitive answers that can be stated unequivocally, it's very clear the following: 9/11 was a significantly inside job executed by elements within the United States government and others. It also is very clear that the Saudis were involved. Primarily, they were involved in order to significantly remedy their jihadist problem as they saw it. And so, therefore, they hung their own out to dry, so to speak, as the alleged culprits, in order for the royal family and others, in my opinions, or at least members of that family, um, to deal with a potentially explosive domestic problem. And this was a way to engage the entire world, and especially the US and its allies, in making sure that whatever jihadism did, it only served the interests of the Western Empire and America. It did not overthrow the Saudi royals. And lastly, of course, it is unequivocally obvious that the Israeli Mossad and others, that the Israelis were involved in 9/11 at the very front and continuing through it to the point of their dual national Michael Chertoff occupying the first directorship of Homeland Security and selling the scanning machines to the airports that were mandated to buy them from his company.
It just smells worse and worse,
The
the
more
more.
you delve into it, the worse and worse it gets. And the reason why this was important is before this time, I could have maybe not hopes. I had no hopes that institutions would perform, without mistakes or without malice. I was beyond that point. But I didn't have a view that certain institutions, certainly the ones I was connected to as an American, could be so hopelessly malicious that they would perpetrate something like 9/11 and its aftermath of warfare and lawfare and domestic restrictions. I had no idea that the malice would be that terrible. And I ended up having to accept it, though, that it was. And that's the main takeaway. And that it changed entirely and forever my view of the limits of legitimacy of government and of the financial powers and others who are interconnected with them, and particularly of some governments. So, like, there is an entirely different scenario, of course, with the government of Guatemala or the government of Bosnia Herzegovina or of Zambia than Israel, the United States, the UK, or Saudi Arabia. This is an entirely different worlds of wrongdoing that's possible.
Yep.
And once I realized fully what had happened, it took a while to get over the shock and the anger. And I'd had a lifetime and series of being shocked. And at a very sensitive, if I can say this, not as just as a businessman and as a hard-boiled person involved with one kind of group or another, which I was, but as a as a professional clergyman who had been deeply involved with people in pastorally through all kind of life crises that they were experiencing and joys and tragedies. And so there was a pastoral element of reckoning here that had to be worked out in me. How do I help people based upon such awful information and reality? Well, one of the things that resulted in was I no longer felt safe living entirely or completely under a government that would allow and perpetrate such a crime. That was not a reasonable response, I thought, to just say, well, we'll try to make it better in the future if we can, or we'll live with it, or whatever has
We'll
happened
fix
has
the
happened.
system. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That was not adequate for the reasons I described. It was not adequate for me or my wife. And from a practical standpoint, we looked at each other and we realized that also the intelligence agencies were largely running the federal government.
Yep.
At least it appeared to us, along with other intelligence agencies like MI6 and the Mossad, um, and unknown ones. And behind them, unknown monetary financial powers, obviously. And we just said, given the circumstances, we need to get another passport too. We need to get another citizenship. We need to get another residency. We need to diversify our lives, not because we want to run away from our calling or from helping people, but we do need to take care of our own family and put ourselves in a situation where we're flexible, because ultimately I'm going to have to stand up and start talking about some of these things that I know.
Right.
And I started to find out and learn about more and more, not just 9/11. And although it got darker and darker, it got brighter and brighter.
Yeah.
And I realized that part of my calling had transmorphed into sharing with people, either religious people or people of goodwill, who were especially bereft, some of them, of information because of their idealism. God bless them. And their idealism about certain institutions. And although I didn't want to, for the sake of shocking them only or harming them, disabuse them of some of their naivete, I felt obligated as you'll read in passages from the New Testament, where um, Jesus Christ makes some very shocking statements, and there's some very shocking revelation about the nature of human beings, human institutions, governments, religious people, that are hard to hear, but you better listen. And
Yeah.
so I realized I was at a new phase, if you will, of my ministry or service or calling, where I needed to talk about this. I needed to bind up all of my different experiences of censorship, of struggle, of lawsuits that I won, of injustices, and of dark forces working in the world. And people think about those dark forces sometimes, Tane, is very esoteric and ethereal. That's not how it works. Dark forces and evil and malicious things work through institutions. It's very institutionalized.
Boy, that's the truth.
Yeah.
In
And so
fact, yeah,
people should not expect, darkness to flow out of some witch's coven that's meeting on Halloween night, flowing over the New Hampshire hills or in Vermont somewhere. Uh, it operates, right there smack dab in your local FBI office.
the institution is the only place that a lot of these people can actually do what it is that they do, because the nature of the ultimate institution being the state, the nature of the state is legal violence. It's legal
Yes,
force. The nature of the state is legal fraud. So
it is, which
the
it
two
is.
tenets of
Yes,
civilization, no force, no
yes,
fraud, are
yes.
exactly what the state represents and exactly what they purvey and exactly how they maintain themselves. And so the kind of people, I mean, I think I have the answer to your question, how do you forgive an institution?
I'm not sure that you do, by the way. That can be one of
I'm
the
not sure
answers.
that I do either, but to me, the only thing that occurs to me is that, like, people say the government or the state, right? But the state and the government, this is a group of people, right? It's not some other thing, right? The government is a bunch of people. Now, it's a bunch
Exactly.
of people operating by different rules than the rest of civilized society is
That's right.
required to live by, unless you want to
Depending
be in a
on
very
what
small room.
depending on what part of the government it is.
Yes, depending on what part of the government, but
Yeah,
you forgive an institution for its wrongdoing by forgiving individuals for
yeah,
their wrongdoing. And one of the ways that that is done is you do your best to speak the truth. And
yes,
and come what may, you speak the truth, because if you depart from that, you end up
yes,
in the kind of reality we're living in now, which is,
yeah.
you know,
Well,
uh,
I think the answer partly is this because as I like to say, I'm libertarian-ish without being a full-blown libertarian. And I wish I could be a libertarian, don't get me wrong. I wish I could, but I do not think that the nature of human beings, and that would include people as good-willed as you and me, will allow it. And so I don't, and even if we were capable of it, unfortunately, there are people that are not, and they are highly motivated in every generation to accrue and exercise power. It's undeniable, and they're not going away, in my opinion, until the what do we call it? Until the change that's occurring, which sometimes called the not the signature,
singularity.
singularity. Yes,
Yes.
until then, which I might have a particular take on that as a Christian, let's say, and another person might have another take on it that's different. But Tane, I believe this about the time we're living in with people. If I had to say what's possible, and I think what's possible is important for us to answer. You know how we're talking about science earlier and Western science and the reductionist nature of science, and now so many Westerners and also other people who are from non-Western um, cultures. We've been living through a time where Western science and their institutions and their methodology we kind of just gave them a blank check.
Blank check. Yeah.
It's like, how much do you want us to fill in?
What,
And
yeah, whatever you say, boss. Yeah.
exactly. And also to the point where, like, if you want to deny other legitimate forms of knowledge and healing, well, that's okay with us too. And it's all built around what I call highly inordinate trust. It's
Hmm.
inappropriate trust.
Yeah.
It's trust at the level that's not good for the practitioners of Western medicine and science, and it's not good for the recipients either. It's
Yeah.
trust that is asked for, in some cases demanded, like we went through recently,
Right.
that leads to abuse of power and to human tragedy. Well, as that exists towards science, Western science, which I think you and I both can agree does or has,